If you are going to, if you are preparing for an interview for SoapUi testing position or SoapUi testing role, this video will be very useful for you. In this video, I will cover most of the important topics related to SoapUi testing. So, without wasting any time, let's get started. First of all, let us have a look at the other tools related to the API testing. So, SoapUi is not the only tool available in the market. There are lots of other tools that you need to understand and why they are being used. So, Postman is like a alternative tool to the SoapUi. So, it is pretty much similar to the SoapUi, but there are obviously some differences, and they are from different organizations as well. Now, SoapUi and ReadyAPI, what's the difference? So, ReadyAPI is basically, they have renamed SoapUi Pro to the ReadyAPI. Now, SoapUi comes in two formats. One is Community Edition and another is license version. So, ReadyAPI is basically a license version of the tool. The next one is this APIG, that is API. So, this is actually a Google product which allows developers to create, scale, and secure their APIs. So in the cloud, they can create these APIs. So that is why this tool is used. And OpenAM tokens are used for authentication purposes. Then there is another tool called as IBM So this is basically a IBM message queue tool. So if APIs are using the message queue, then this is used. Then there is a bstock. This is similar to the IBM integration bus. And then SQL Server. So most of the companies will be using some kind of database, and SQL Server is one of them. Then there is a TeamCity and Azure DevOps. If you want to run the tests in the cloud, then you can integrate your SoapUi tests in these cloud platforms, and Quality Center and Agile. So these things or these products may be used in any testing project. So you should know like the ecosystem, whole ecosystem, and other tools as well. Now let us talk about OpenAM. So OpenAM is Open Access Management. So this is a open access management protocol which is used for the authentication and authorization purposes. And it provides below features: authentication, authorization, web services security. If you want to secure your web services API, you can use this OpenAM as well in that case. Then SSO, that is single sign-on. In that case also OpenAM is useful. Federation, entitlement, manage user identities, cross-domain, single sign-on, SAML2, OAuth2, OpenID Connect. So all these things fall under one specification, and it is called as OpenAM, that is Open Access Management. So you should have basic understanding of all these concepts, like what is the significance of OAuth2, and what is OpenID Connect, how it is different from OAuth2, then what is SAML2. Then in authentication, there are two types: single factor and multi-factor. So whenever most of the websites nowadays require you to have multi-factor authentication, that means apart from having the password, you also need some kind of code, or the code that comes in the message on the phone, that you can use for the multi-factor authentication. Now, if you want to secure your web services, there are two types of keys, like API keys and tokens. So API keys are used by the applications, and tokens are for the users. And then there is a protocol called as OAuth, which is used for the authorization, and which can use the JWT, that is JSON Web Token, for the authorization. Then you should also understand what is the identity provider. There are two types of identity providers: Google, Facebook. Actually not two, there are a lot of others, but these are the major identity providers. So meaning of this identity provider is that, let us say there is one website, say Spotify, and you want to log in. So instead of creating a new user ID and password for the Spotify, what you do is, like, you use the Google's credentials, and then Spotify will contact Google, and once you give the permission to the Spotify to access the Google credentials, then that way you don't need to create the new credentials. So that is what the identity providers role is. Like, identity providers allow you other third-party websites to use your credentials or prove your identity. Then there is OAuth 2 frameworks. It is a authorization framework. It is secure delegated access. App can access users' resources on other server. For example, a website can ask user to permit it to go and fetch Google Photos. So OAuth 2 is basically used to allow the apps to access the user's resources. Then there is OpenID Connect and SAML. These are both industry standards for the federated authentication. OpenID Connect is used for the login purposes. So I just mentioned identity providers are the Google and Facebook. So that's what this OpenID Connect is used, and it is also used for the SSO, that is single sign-on as well. Then there is a SAML. So SAML is basically security assertion markup language, and it provides federation identity management single sign-on. So you should be able to tell like what is the purpose of each of these technologies or the protocols. Then a brief introduction about this API. This is a Google product. I already told you is for the API management. You can design, secure, analyze, scale APIs. You can manage the API lifecycle. You can add the layers of security to protect APIs, stop malicious attacks on API server, monitor API traffic, and CDN can also be used as content delivery network for the faster responses. Then message queue. Now message queue is also a very important concept. If you want to work as a backend tester, then this is an important concept. Most of the websites will have the client server model, but there are some applications where message queues are also used. Now, what is the main benefit of having the message queue in the application? So message queues are used to get the fault tolerant responses from the server. For example, if the server is down, still a message queue can store that message, and then whenever that server comes up, that message will be picked up by the server and then processed. So that way this timeout request timeouts or this kind of errors do not appear. And here are some of the important benefits or scenarios where you would like to use the message queue in your applications. For example, image scaling, sending large or many emails, search engine indexing, file scanning, video encoding, delivering notifications, PDF processing, etc. So all these kind of operations are very lengthy operations, and you don't want your users to wait until these operations are finished. So these operations may happen in the background while user is doing other operations on the website. So that is when these message queues are very useful. They are very fault tolerant. That means once the message is sent, it is the responsibility of the message queue to keep track of the message, and message queue will make sure that a message is not dropped, even if the server is not working. And it sits in the it is kind of a middleware. That means client doesn't talk to the server directly. It talks to the message broker, and then message broker in turn talks to the servers. And as I already told you, it can decouple two services like producer service and consumer services. They like producer service, you can think about it as like a client, and consumer service is like a server. So it decouples two services. That means even if one of the services is not up and running, still message broker can handle that situation. It is scalable. If server fails, queue persists the message when the server is working again. It receives the pending message. If the server gives a response to the call and the client fails, if the client didn't acknowledge the response, the message is persisted. So that's why it is a very robust protocol, and most of the companies use this one. And this RabbitMQ is one of the message brokers. There is IBM MQ as well, but RabbitMQ is open source. That's why this is also very important tool. So producer sends the message to the exchange. Exchange looks at the route key, and using the binding link, it sends the message to the message queue. Now in the message queue, there are two components. One is exchange and the message queue. So there can be multiple message queues. and Exchange gets the message from the like producer, and then Exchange decides to which queue this message should be forwarded based upon the route key. Then consumer grabs the message from the queue, message is sent to the Exchange and then forwarded to the message queue. Now there are different types of exchanges: direct, topic, fan out, and headers. Then RabbitMQ supports below messaging protocols. Now there are different messaging protocols like AMQP, Advanced Message Queuing Protocol. Then there is a Storm, there is text-based messaging protocol. Then there is MQTT, Binary Protocol, HTTP, and WebSockets. So all these protocols are supported by RabbitMQ. Then there is another tool called as Kafka, which runs as a cluster and it provides real-time streaming services. Then there is an IBM integration bus. Now, what is the difference between IBM integration bus and IBM MQ? So, IBM MQ is just like a message broker, but IBM integration bus is used to connect lots of diverse systems in a particular company. So, there can be different tools, different servers, and different types of services, protocols. So, to connect all these tools together and visualize all these tools, this IBM integration bus is used, and Microsoft's BizTalk server is provides the similar kind of functionality. So as you can see here, BizTalk is also it contains the message broker plus a lot of stuff, like you can visualize the system, then you can add the adapters, you can have the business rule engine in there, business activity monitoring can also happen. Now let us start with the SoapUi core concepts. Now SoapUi is used for the testing APIs, and API can be like REST based as well as XML based, like SOAP based, and a lot of other protocols are also supported by the SoapUi. For example, you can also work with GraphQL, then JDBC, JMS, MQTT, WebSockets. You can also import the Swagger, WSDL, WVDL, RAML, API, Blueprint, IODoc. So this kind of documentation you can import. And also Apache Kafka is also supported here. It also supports MQTT as well. So that is a message protocol. MQTT, that is message queuing telemetry transport. It's designed for the smaller devices with a low bandwidth, and there is another protocol, AMQP, this is Advanced Message Queuing Protocol. Now, SoapUi also provides the integration with lots of other tools like GitHub, Bitbucket, Swagger, Jira, Selenium, Jenkins, Azure DevOps, AWS Gateway, Swagger Hub, MuleSoft, Zephyr, etc. Now, to install it, you have to go to this website, SmartBear. SmartBear is the company that owns this tool, but it provides two versions. There is a community edition and then there is a pro version. So, earlier they used to call it SoapUi Pro, but now it has been renamed to ReadyAPI. Now to create a SOAP project, just go to the SoapUi interface, and in here you can see you can create a project, new SOAP project or the REST project or the empty project. You can also import the projects as well. And then at the time of creating project, you can provide the WSDL file. Based upon that WSDL file, it will you can give the project name, you can give the initial WSDL file as well here. So as soon as you give the WSDL file, what happens is that it automatically finds out all the operations or the endpoints and sample request responses as well. As you can see, there is a calculator WSDL which has these operations: add, divide, multiply, subtract. So these are automatically added here. Okay, once it is added, what you can do is you can add the request. So I have already added some requests here. There is one test case. So basically, you have to organize this project in the test suites. Okay, it can have multiple test suites in a single project, and in that test suite there will be multiple test cases. Each test case has got test steps. For example, here is one HTTP request step. You can enable or disable steps like that, and you can just double click to view that particular request. So you can see this is a GET request. You can change it to the POST or any other HTTP method, and request URL, you can put it there. If you want to add some headers, just click down here and then you can click on the plus button. Just you can specify the name of the header authorization, for example. So it can be any header name actually, and its value you can put it there. Okay. If you want to do add some attachments, you can add it here. And for authorization, there is actually another separate tab as well that you can use. You can also add the parameters as well here. And if you want to see that on the actual request, you can click here. So once you click on this button, this request is sent to the server, and then the response you can view it here. So you can see I'm just gonna hit run button, and then you can see the responses come here. You can see the response headers by clicking there, and then attachments, SSL info as well. So you can have a look at the SSL certificate as well. And headers is here, and bodies in here. If you want to add the assertions, you can just click here, and then you can add the assertion by clicking on the plus button. There are different types of assertions. We will have a look at it, these assertions in a bit. So I told you how you can edit the request headers, body, etc. Okay, so if you want to run the tests, there are two ways basically. So just select the test suite in here, and then you can run it. So you can see there are two options. The selected test cases are run in parallel. By default, it runs in sequence, but if you want to run it in parallel, just select there, and then the test will be running in parallel. So you need to remember that thing. Now let us have a look at the data-driven testing. So in data-driven testing, what happens is that you want to execute the same test case but with a different data. So how you would do that in SoapUi? For that, there is something called as a data source, but the data source comes only in the professional version or the ReadyAPI. So you can't use it in the community edition. But the idea is that you can use these different types of files, for example, Excel, TXT, JSON, JDBC, XML, etc. So you can get the data from these files, and basically SoapUi will do the iterations. So you can add one step called as data source loop. So with the help of which the same test will be executing for the test data. And this is how you access different properties in the data source. So you have to give the $, then there is a curly brackets, and then there is a data source name, and then hash and property name like this. This is JDBC data set you can also use as well. So in that case, you have to connect to the JDBC server, that is a SQL server, and then data will be read from that particular server. You will have to give the connection string, making sure that connection is working, and then add SQL query. So based upon that SQL query, that test data will be used. Then there is an assertions, as I already told you how you can do the assertions. So here you can click on this plus button and then add the assertions. So there are these types of assertions: property, content, contents. Now the response, this is disabled, JSON, path, count, etc. So because the response is not a JSON, as you can see, response is just HTML, so that's why it is disabled. If the response in your request is like this one, the JSON, then these fields will be enabled, and you can add the assertions for those types of data, for example, JSON path count or JSON path match, etc. And then there is a contents and not contents, XPath match, XQuery match, all these kinds of assertions you can do. There is a compliance status, etc. For example, if you want to check the HTTP status code, you can use this thing. There is a script, you can run a custom script to perform arbitrary validations. So you can write the Groovy script in this particular assertion. Then there is a response SLA. For example, if you want to check how long that request took to get the response from the server, so you can check the response time here. And there is other, for example, security. Checks that the last message doesn't expose the sensitive information about the target system. And there is JMS and JDBC, which is not applicable for this particular request because this is a HTTP request and it has nothing to do with JMS and JDBC. That's why it is disabled. So if you want to add, just click here and then you can click on this particular assertion that you want and then just click on add. Let's say I want to check that the status code is 200. So that's how you can add the assertions. Okay. Now in assertions there are also you can add the XPath assertions as well. So in XPath assertions you can check that you can give the XPath basically and then say that okay, for this XPath the value should be say XYZ, something like that. And similarly for the JSON as well, you can use the JSON path expressions. Now in the assertions you can also write the Groovy script as well. So here you can see one example: assert message exchange dot response errors is not equal to null. So here we are checking that the response errors, this response error is not null. Then time taken is less than 400 milliseconds, that we are checking here. That attachments is equal to 2. And also you can do the lot of other assertions as well, like you can retrieve the data from the XML or the JSON response as well and do the iterations. Now to execute the tests, I already told you how you can execute the tests in UI, but if you want to run the tests through the command line, you can do that one as well. So before that you will have to export your project. Okay, so to export the project, go here and then click here on the project name, then right click and then export the project. Okay, export the project. After that export project is done, it will be saved in the zip file. Then you have to extract that and then you will find one XML file in that. So basically you have to use that XML file and then run this command. So you need to know where is your SoapUi is installed. So on Mac it is installed at this location for me, and then you have to give the file name. So I want to execute this project. So you can also get this particular command directly from the SoapUi itself. So just right click and then click on launch test runner, and in here just click on launch and you can see this command here. So it is showing where the SoapUi is installed, and also this is how it is running, test run.sh, and this is the first parameter, the XML file. And there is XML parsing and JSON parsing. So Groovy script is very powerful. It is just like a Java language, and whatever you can do in Java or Groovy is possible here. Like you can write any script that you want. So if you are worked in Java, you must be familiar with these statements like import. We are importing some packages or the classes, and then we are using these Groovy utils to get the XML from the response, and then once it is there, you can just get the node value and do the assertions as well. And if the payload or the response is in the JSON format, you can use this JSON slurper, okay, and use this syntax to access the JSON props. Now there are different types of properties that you can use in your SoapUi. So properties you can add at the project level, suite level, test case level, etc. So properties you can use them as like a variables. So if you have defined any property at the project level, you can access that using this syntax $project /prop1. So here project is basically the project name you have to give. Then test suite name, if it is the defined at the test suite level, test suite name, and then property name. Then there is a test step name and then prop name, like that. You can access it in the Groovy script like this, context.expand and then property name, and you can retrieve it in the Groovy script. And there is an important concept called as property transfer. So property transfer is basically used to get the response value from a specific value in the response and then pass it on to the next request. So that is where the property transfer is used. So once you are the property transfer step, you will have to give the property name that you want to pass, and then you will have to tell like what is the source, okay, and then what is the target, like from where you want to get that particular property, and then in which request you want to send it. And then some terms you need to understand. There is a WSDL, like web service description language, okay, which is used to describe SOAP service. So if there is a SOAP service, developers will give you WSDL document. It is in XML format, and then once you import it in the SoapUi, you can understand like how many operations are there, what are the operations, what is the sample request response, etc. Or you can also import the Swagger API definition as well. So if you import it, it will tell you exactly what all endpoints are there in the web service. And there is another term UDDI, there is universal description, discovery and integration. So this is useful. This is like a registry for the WSDLs. And this is a WSDL structure. So any WSDL document will have this type of structure. So this is the sample WSDL document, as you can see here. So this is how it looks like. So main components, I will explain you what are the main components in this WSDL. So there is a service, it can have multiple ports. Each port will identify a unique endpoint or other service. And then there is a binding. There is a binding for each port and contains substrate operations. And then there is a port type which describes the input output message for the operations. And then in the message, it actually tells like what is the input and output message, sample input output message. And then in the types, you can tell what types of data it is being sending and receiving. So here is the sample SOAP elements, sample SOAP request. So in a SOAP, there is a envelope, and then in that envelope there can be header and then body. Header is optional, but it should have envelope and body elements. And then you should also know about the REST, like what is the REST and why it is popular than the SOAP or XML. So some of the important characteristics of the REST API is that it is stateless, which is HTTP protocol. It is cacheable, and then it needs less bandwidth as compared to the SOAP web services, because in SOAP web service you have to send the data in the XML format, and it has to be in the specific format as well, like there is envelope, header, body, etc. But in REST there is no restrictions and structure of the data that you want to send. That is some of the major difference between the REST and the SOAP based web services. I think that's it. I have covered most of the important topics related to the SoapUi and ReadyAPI. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me. I will definitely try to help you. Thanks for watching this video.